country's new leaders say he was one of the Marcos cronies and have placed him on a most wanted list. Paul Dalby has more.
Just a month ago, the Toronto Consul General, Oscar Carino, found his offices invaded by a protest rally of supporters for new Philippines President Corazon Aquino. He must have sensed that this was the writing on the wall for his career. He was right. Carino has now been placed on his country's most wanted list because of his close ties to former President Ferdinand Marcos. The new Aquino government is directing a great deal of its efforts to recovering all or part of Marcos's enormous personal fortune, estimated to be between $2 and $3 billion worldwide. But where did Marcos hide his money? The Aquino government thinks the Toronto Consul General knows. Oscar Carino was vice president of the state-owned Philippine National Bank in New York from 1973 to 1984. And New York is one of the most likely hiding places for the Marcos millions. At the Philippines consulate in Midtown Toronto, officials were at first reluctant to answer questions about their former boss. But under the watchful gaze of the country's First Lady and an armed security guard, the new acting Consul General finally agreed to comment on Mr. Carino's fate.
We have already canceled his passports as directed by our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And we're now in the process of drawing up their travel documents for one-way travel to the Philippines.
When does Mr. Carino have to be out of Canada by?
His resignation was accepted effective March 4th, but he was given until April 4th to wind up his affairs and make his farewell calls.
Paul Dalby, Global News.
Still to come on the evening edition, part 2 of a special report on Medicare issues in Quebec.
Criminal investigations and other legal proceedings concerning Marcos and his associates. On Marcos himself, the Associated Press reported the United States is negotiating with Panama about the possibility of the deposed Philippine leader moving there from Hawaii.
Marcos's successor, Corazon Aquino, is planning to set up a temporary democratic revolutionary government in the Philippines. That word came today from one of her aides, who indicated plans will be unveiled Monday, that they will involve abolishing the National Assembly, and that they will call for a definite period of time before a new permanent constitution takes effect. Meanwhile, communist guerrillas in the Philippines continued their attacks around the island nation. 16 people, including a town mayor, were killed yesterday in an ambush in the province of Cagayan.
Now in hiding in America. Dan was not. Marcos treated the government of the Philippines as a family business. It came from the chairman of the congressional subcommittee looking into Marcos's financial affairs. And Congressman Stephen Solars also said the personal documents Marcos brought with him from the Philippines make up, as he put it, an encyclopedia of corruption. Here's ABC's John Martin.
In Washington this afternoon, Asian Affairs Subcommittee Chairman Stephen Solars finally released about 2,100 pages of documents taken 3 weeks ago from the Marcos family when it reached Hawaii. Among them, an accounting of $11 million in commissions paid by Westinghouse to Swiss and Philippine bank accounts, apparently for a nuclear power plant. Westinghouse has denied it paid the Marcoses. There were records of $9.3 million paid to a company called Volaby, an owner in the Herald Center shopping mall in New York. Payments from a Philippine intelligence budget of about $700,000 in expenses for foreign trips by Mrs. Marcos and others. The same document, under the typed name Mabuhay Corporation, shows a list of political contributions of more than $175,000 to San Francisco, California, and presidential candidates. Donations denied by most of those on the list. But Congressman Solars said there were some important missing elements.
They do not contain a comprehensive statement of the net worth of the Marcoses, their assets, liabilities, and worldwide investments. My guess is they probably would need a computer.
In New York, meanwhile, the Filipino senator leading the search for the Marcos assets, Jovito Salonga, went to federal court and produced a series of documents he said tie the Marcoses to some of Manhattan's most expensive real estate. He showed a copy of 2 declarations of trust taken from the palace in Manila and signed by Joseph Bernstein, a New York lawyer and real estate broker. The declarations pledge Mr. Bernstein to act in Mr. Marcos's behalf. According to the Philippine government, that would permit Mr. Marcos to control properties held by the La Stura Company, which owns the Crown Building, a New York skyscraper. Senator Salonga also produced photocopies and an inventory of what he said were about $3 million in checks written by Vilma Bautista, a diplomat at the Philippine consulate in New York. So the Marcos documents have begun to spill into the public domain now, but the search for the assets and the power to control them has just begun for the struggling government he left behind. John Martin, ABC News, Washington.
ABC News has been conducting its own investigation into the charges of widespread corruption by the Marcos government. Today we turned up a man who may have first-hand knowledge of what went on, a man who used to be a member of Ferdinand Marcos's inner circle. ABC's James Walker talked with Victor Natuta, who is in hiding in the United States.
Victor Natuta is a man in hiding. For 32 years, he was a trusted and loyal aide to Ferdinand Marcos, rising from stenographer to the most senior presidential assistant. On the night Marcos fled his palace, Aquino supporters raided government files, including the locked filing cabinet in Natuta's office. ABC News has obtained some of those documents, which reveal that Natuta and his influence were for sale. This letter shows he was to receive $50,000 for negotiating the sale of Philippine government property in Tokyo.
I made that letter to the president, and there was no answer, no action taken.
But Natuta, the presidential assistant, used many other titles in private business deals. Here, as an executive of the Pan-Asiatic Marketing Company, he was supposed to be paid a commission for negotiating an oil sale. He claims the deal fell through.
There are many, many examples that we have found in your files where you were supposed to benefit financially if these business deals went through. Signing the letters as a presidential assistant, in addition, making money on the side if the deals go through.
Yeah, but as I told you earlier, I was authorized to do part-time business and part-time practice of law.
Doesn't that mean, rather, full-time conflict of interest?
It's up to the president to determine.
But this contract shows that for using his influence, Natuta was paid $1,000 a month for helping to obtain lucrative port permits.
I would like to request you not to continue on this because my answer may tend to incriminate me.
Natuta had one other title in the Philippines, head of civilians for Marcos, and he still feels that loyalty.
To me and my family, he is our second God.
Today, Natuta learned he can't go home because his name has been placed on a special list of people the Aquino government would like to interrogate. Now he says he would consider requesting political asylum in the United States. James Walker, ABC News.
Overseas today, a bomb went off in a shopping mall on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. 2 people were killed and 28 others injured. A short time later, a second bomb was found and defused.
Their greed, their avarice, their lies, their the deliberate trouncing of our rights and the burying of our souls. They've been the greatest scandal in our history, and they have given us the darkest ages, the darkest age.
In rural provinces like Negros Occidental, the economic crisis was in some ways even worse than in Manila. We found farm workers at one sugar hacienda harvesting rocks. Their families were eating roots and grass, the same food they fed to their pigs. World sugar prices, coupled with economic mismanagement, favoritism, and corruption, had reduced Negros to an impoverished island where many people blamed Marcos for their problems. One of them was Fred Fleider, a sugar planter who by last year had joined the opposition.
I believe that the problem between the rich and the poor, the constant sense of hostility, especially on the part of the poor, comes not so much from the fact that they are poor and that there are rich people, but that the government prevents them from becoming rich even if they tried their darndest to be rich. They can't. The system defeats them.
That was 7 months ago. Now Filipinos are celebrating their people's revolution. But the economic and political problems left behind by the old government may prove far more difficult to overcome than Marcos himself. Today in Manila, Mrs. Aquino said she was determined and optimistic.
The challenges and difficulties that our people and I face are daunting, but I am fortunate to be the president of a people who have demonstrated the courage, the tenacity, the idealism, and the self-sacrifice to meet any goal and overcome any obstacle.
For a U.S. business perspective, we turn to Louis Burridge, who recently completed a 3-year term as president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Manila. Mr. Burridge spent 17 years in the Philippines with the Asian subsidiary of the Sterling Drug Corporation. He joins us tonight from public station WGBH in Boston. Mr. Burridge, how would you assess the economic crisis or problem that Mrs. Aquino faces?
Well, I think there are enormous problems to be addressed as she takes her office. However, I think one advantage she now has is she does not have to contend with a business community concerned about political uncertainties. I suppose she will also have political problems as her government goes into office and as time moves on, but at least she can assure herself of business cooperation, both the private sector of the foreign community and the Philippine community, who have looked forward for at least 3 years for this opportunity.
Reuters news agency polled bankers and businessmen in Manila today and found them by and large very optimistic that business confidence is going to be restored there. What do you think about that? Are you?
I think the simple fact of political change generates that confidence, and I think the confidence will continue and result in economic recovery if she can organize a government that can work closely with the private sector. I think this is the main problem over the last 3 years, is the disillusionment of the private sector and disillusion over special privileges given to specific people and institutions close to the administration.
How extensive were corrupt business practices under Marcos?
I don't think corruption itself describes the complete picture. I would say certainly there was corruption. But special privileges was overwhelming.
Describe what you mean by that.
Businessmen, and I'm speaking now of Philippine businessmen, let alone foreign businessmen. Philippine businessmen had a very difficult time fighting those who had access to patronage, access to the financial institutions, to loans, access to land grants, protection of the military, and other favors due to their closeness to the administration. And there was almost no way to oppose this under the conditions that existed the last 2 or 3 years.
Some industries like pineapple crops and sugar were reportedly in the hands of Marcos' cronies who ran virtual monopolies. Was that rampant throughout the economy, or was that confined to just a few industries?
Not too many industries, but certainly the most important and the largest industries. The American Chamber made many representations to President Marcos and to his cabinet officers in respect to these abuses, and usually got a very pleasant hearing, but nothing much happened to correct them.
Do you expect Mrs. Aquino to be able effectively to take on these monopolies? I mean, are they going to disband themselves or give in easily?
Well, it's probably not an easy problem to address, especially those very large ones, the coconut and the sugar, which provide a large part...
Was I wrong about pineapples? It's coconuts.
It's coconut.
I'm sorry, yes.
That provide a large part of the foreign exchange. And of course, you're dealing here with world market prices. Sugar as an industry might be considered a twilight industry. There is an awful lot that has to be done to make that industry competitive. Yet 65% of the Philippine population is rural and largely dependent on sugar and coconut. The newer non-traditional industries will prosper more rapidly, I think, but there are serious basic problems that a simple change in administration won't be able to cure completely.
Among the Marcos opposition were people who claimed and continue to claim that the Philippines is still a feudal economy. We just heard Krause's report that wealth is in very few hands, some say in even fewer hands under Marcos than it was, and that poverty is widespread and that there's no chance of bridging the gap. How do you assess that problem and the difficulties of overcoming it?
Well, I would never agree that there is no chance of bridging the gap. Other countries in Asia have made progress, and the Philippines itself was making progress until 5 or 6 years ago. It was impacted very heavily by its debt load and by oil prices, but of course most of all politically by the assassination of Mr. Aquino.
What difference is failure to deal radically with that basic problem of the division between rich and poor, going to create problems down the line? For instance, to make the communist alternative more appealing to the poorer Filipinos.
It seems to me that the growth of NPA was probably equally due to political unrest as well as economic unrest. I think if Mrs. Aquino can answer the political question and reinstitute the democratic institutions in the country, the economic problems can be gradually solved. It is not an impossible situation, but certainly it's going to be very difficult, and I think all Filipinos expect the United States to be very forward in assisting them in that effort.
How do you think it should do so, briefly?
Well, for one thing, I think they were going to have to address their debt load. It's killing them now. I think there will have to be some modification of the terms of the IMF World Bank agreement on rescheduling their debt. Secondly, I think U.S. aid and perhaps trade is something to be evaluated and reevaluated. Certainly, all of Asia is looking at us now and will be making up their minds as to the viability of our relationships, their relationships with us, based on how we react to the Philippine situation in the next few months and few years.
Well, Mr. Burridge, thank you very much for joining us. Jim?
Thank you.
We moved the discussion to the politics, internationally and otherwise, of what is happening in the Philippines. American conservatives had been among the last to join the chorus calling for the removal of Ferdinand Marcos. Now that it is done, most have applauded the way the Reagan administration handled the situation. But what of Jesse Helms? Well, until today, the acknowledged leader of the most conservative wing of the Republican Party in the Senate had not been heard from. Judy Woodruff talked to him this morning, and he said the key word now is hope.
I hope that Ms. Aquino is for real when she says now that she's not going to have anything to do with communism. They're going to give them amnesty and that sort of thing. But more importantly, who is going to be actively advising her? Because taking nothing away from the lady, and I've never met her, she's going to have some experts in the art of government. And if she gets the right people who are anti-communist, then it'll be blue sky for the free world. If she gets people around her who are persuasive to her, that, oh, well, we ought to take some of these communists in and let them help us run this government, then it's Katie bar the door down the road.
Do you think the administration was too hard on Marcos at the end?
I thought the administration made clear that he was a friend and ally. I know it was not an easy thing for the president to do, but I don't know what the State Department did throughout all this. I seldom understand what the State Department is doing anyhow. But in any case, the Senate, in my judgment, made a mistake when it addressed this thing. Because how would we have felt if in 1960, when it was pretty well understood that the presidential election was stolen in this country? If Great Britain had, or the Parliament had approved a resolution condemning corruption in U.S. politics.
You're saying that even though there was widespread evidence of fraud and abuse on the part of the Marcos campaign?
There is widespread evidence, I understand, on both sides. And you don't hear anything about the corruption in the election on the other side. But that's a fait accompli, and I don't think we ought to bother ourselves about that. We ought to concentrate on preventing a communist takeover of the Philippines, as happened in Nicaragua, Cuba, Zimbabwe.
But without pursuing that, but just to pursue it for a moment, you are convinced that there was fraud on the Aquino side? I mean, from what you've heard.
Well, I wasn't there, but there have been reports that have not been released that I'm not privy to discuss publicly. But there was fraud on both sides. Generally, is right here at home.
What do you think this Marcos experience says about how this administration, how this government treats its friends overseas?
I would have hoped, just as one senator and as one American, that all along we would have been more forthcoming in our help in making clear what the problems of Marcos were. Now, I'm not defending Marcos. I'm certainly not defending any corruption in any election or anything else. But I'm saying that if he had communist orchestrating upheaval and revolution, using innocent people, unknowing people, then he had a real problem. And if our intelligence people knew that, and they did, then they ought to have done something about it, or we ought to have done something about it. It's sort of like, Judy, in Nicaragua. Maybe Somoza was not your dish of tea or my dish of tea, but he was sure as heck a lot better than what was in second place.
We continue the discussion now with political opposites, the Reverend Jerry Falwell and George McGovern. Reverend Falwell is the head of the Liberty Federation, once called the Moral Majority. He joins us from Lynchburg, Virginia. Mr. McGovern was a United States Senator from South Dakota and the 1972 Democratic nominee for president. Senator McGovern, do you share Senator Helms' concerns about the possible communist influence down the line over Mrs. Aquino and her new government?
I think that danger has been greatly lessened now that Marcos is gone. The real danger of communist growth in the Philippines was a bad reaction to Marcos. That's what gave them their opportunity. Obviously, the communists are there, even though Marcos is gone, but you now have a government under Mrs. Aquino that has the support of the overwhelming majority of the people of the Philippines. It has the support of the business community, it has the support of top military leaders, it has the support of rank and file people. And I think what we have seen the last few weeks is the most inspirational triumph of a people seeking to assert their democratic aspirations that we've seen in many, many years. It's my own view that the steady growth of that kind of freedom in the Philippines and a government that will be more sensitive to the political and economic and social concerns of the people is the best safeguard we have against communist growth in that country.
Reverend Falwell, what's your view of that?
Well, obviously, we have two responsibilities. One, we need to be praying for a very successful transition. We can be thankful to God for the fact that this was virtually a bloodless revolution. And I would concur with Senator McGovern that it has been most inspirational to watch that from both sides, from Mr. Marcos and from Mrs. Aquino. There has been a commitment to nonviolence. I particularly applaud President Reagan because he did not attempt to interfere early on. He waited till the very last moment when it became clear that the will of the Filipino people was being made known, that at that time it called for Mr. Marcos to step down, and at the same time did what is American precedent, there's much precedent for, and that is not only attempted to prevent Mr. Marcos from hurting his opponents, but removed him from the scene, offered him sanctuary, and in the long haul, if Senator McGovern is correct, and if the concerns of my friend Senator Helms are not fulfilled, and that is that there is not an overwhelming amount of influence on the part of the NPA and the Marxist insurgents upon Mrs. Aquino, this could turn out to be a very positive thing for, in the end, the final analysis. It is only in, and the President has not erred in being a friend of Mr. Marcos, because in a right-wing autocratic regime like the one of the Philippines, it has given way to democracy, as was the case in Argentina, Brazil, Guatemala, Greece, Portugal, Spain. And that never happens, even in the weakest Marxist regime, such as Poland. Democracy is forever gone whenever there's a Marxist takeover. So the president has not been wrong in being a friend to those who are friends of us, even if they're right-wing dictators, but he also has been very right in working for a peaceful and bloodless transition, and I would commend him as well, and the governor in Hawaii for giving to Mr. Marcos and his family an opportunity for refuge.
Could I just say a word about Senator Helms' earlier observation about giving the State Department a bad rap? That's very popular, to blame the State Department when things go wrong, but I think this is a clear triumph for the State Department. I think Secretary Schultz and the professionals in the State Department saw some time ago that Marcos had lost his popular base, and that for us to cling to him simply on the grounds that we had bases, military bases in the Philippines was a no-win proposition. And so they cautioned him and persuaded the president to caution him that reforms had to be carried out. They urged these elections, which President Marcos, to his credit, agreed to. They also insisted, when those elections were clearly won by Mrs. Aquino, with Senator Lugar and others on the scene testifying to the widespread corruption on the part of the Marcos team, that he step aside. I think in this case you can't really fault the way the State Department weighed in. The one lapse was President Reagan's unfortunate comment about there being fraud on both sides. I don't see the evidence of fraud on the Aquino side.
Let's move to the politics in this country. It's been suggested that only a conservative president like President Reagan could have actually given the nudge to a man like Marcos. Do you agree, Senator McGovern?
Well, that may have been true to some extent, but I do think the American people as a whole were ready for this. I want to give the president credit. When the crunch came, he stood on the right side of the issue, urging President Marcos to step down. It's quite possible that there would have been a louder outcry from conservative elements in this country if that position had been taken, let us say, by former President Carter or Kennedy or Johnson or some of the other Democrats. So there's something in what you have to say. It's a kind of an interesting paradox that in the last month, President Duvalier in Haiti and President Marcos in the Philippines, two of the less popular governments in the world, have both gone. And I give the Reagan administration a couple of points on that. I think by and large they handled both of those things rather well.
As a conservative, Reverend Falwell, how do you feel about this thesis that only a conservative like President Reagan could have done this, to include Duvalier and Marcos, the way that he did?
I think there's some value to that statement, some merit to it. However, I think that Senator McGovern is correct that clearly, when I was in the Philippines just a couple of months ago, just after Senator Laxalt was there, we both urged Mr. Marcos. We first commended him for calling for elections, but we also urged him to see to it that those elections were honest and above reproach, so that there could be a clear mandate in this country that the people, the Filipino people, wanted him. Obviously, he didn't pay any attention to that. But I think while we're passing out accolades, that Paul Laxalt deserves a great deal of commendation, not only because of his first visit there, his visit with Mr. Marcos, and clearly articulating President Reagan's wishes. And Mr. Marcos explained to me that Mr. Laxalt had in fact told him very clearly and up front what was expected from this side of the waters. His phone call with Mr. Marcos, urging that he step down and that he cut cleanly. I think that had quite an impact on his not using military might when he was in the position to do it. There was a point, and I was listening to Rayleigh and Ramos last night say that there was a point when they were very, very weak, and had Mr. Marcos wished to do it, that could have been a real bloodbath. And so to Senator Laxalt, I think the American people and the Filipino people owe a great debt of gratitude.
Neither of you gentlemen are concerned at all about the President of the United States in interfering in any way in the change of government in another nation?
Not at all. When you consider that all we were asking for were fair elections, and for the government that we've been backing out there over the years with generous amounts of American foreign aid to heed that election, I think it was perfectly proper that we weighed in diplomatically and politically to urge that those election results be heeded.
But what about Senator Helms' point that in the 1960 election, if Great Britain had said, hey, you had a fraudulent election in the United States, go away, President Kennedy, we would have been...
I don't think anybody takes that seriously. First of all, I've never heard the man who was defeated in 1960 say that the election was stolen from him. If he felt that way, he didn't challenge it in any way. No one's ever accused President Nixon of not pressing his advantage politically. So I think this charge is a specious one. It seems to me that the big lesson of what happened in the Philippines, and it was something the State Department understood in this case, is that American foreign policy, the dominant note in American foreign policy can't simply to be anti-Russian or anti-communist. Basically, the dominant note ought to be pro-liberty. It's important what the United States stands for.
You agree with that, Reverend Falwell?
I do indeed, and I would hope now that what we have seen happen in the Philippines can be an example for us as we approach the totalitarian government in Managua, Nicaragua, so that we might get behind President Reagan's efforts to give assistance to those courageous freedom fighters, the Contras in Central America, to bring down another totalitarian regime that allows no free press, no freedom of religion, where our missionaries are killed. And you know, even in the worst days of Mr. Marcos in the Philippines, our missionaries there who represent Jesus Christ were never one time challenged as to their right to preach the gospel. And I believe that Mrs. Aquino will follow that same example. So I hope that in our support for Jonas Savimbi in Angola and our support for freedom fighters worldwide, we'll give the same kind of support.
All right. Thank you very much, Reverend Falwell. Senator McGovern.
NewsHour in just a...
can achieve. The remarkable people of those 7,000 islands joined together with faith in the same principles on which America was founded, that men and women have the right to freely choose their own destiny. Despite a flawed election, the Filipino people were understood. They carried their message peacefully, and they were heard across their country and across the world. We salute the remarkable restraint shown by both sides to prevent bloodshed during these last tense days. Our hearts and hands are with President Aquino and her new government as they set out to meet the challenges ahead. Today, the Filipino people celebrate the triumph of democracy, and the world celebrates with them. One cannot sit in this office reviewing intelligence on the military threat we face, making decisions from arms control to Libya to the Philippines.
Carnival, a symbol of what people power won.
The people's power. And without the people, we cannot do anything about it.
We believe that if ever there was a people's power, it's because of the power of prayer.
The people they are free to speak, to enjoy everything.
There was a hero's welcome for General Fidel Ramos, the new armed forces chief whose defection from Marcos gave the Aquino revolution its military clout. He's already shuffled top officers. His soldiers cleared the palace of booby-trap bombs left by Marcos' forces and seized some of the bounty stolen by looters the night before, even photos of the deposed dictator. And from the new regime, some quick action, plans for the release of political prisoners held by Marcos. Aquino's ascension to power is no guarantee of peace or prosperity in the Philippines. She still has to cope with militant Marcos loyalists, at the same time start tackling all the country's problems. So no one, she warns, should expect instant miracles. Roger Smith.
A man without a country and on the run. He looked like an ailing tourist as he got off the plane, as George Lewis reports.
Marcos did not look well as he arrived. He had to be assisted by a military aide as he limped down the airplane ramp. He was greeted by an old friend, Hawaii Governor George Ariyoshi, the only elected official who showed up. There was unusually tight security for Marcos and his entourage of 88. During an earlier stopover in Guam, there had been telephone death threats against the deposed president.
We love Marcos. We love you, Marcos. We welcome you in Hawaii.
A small group of Marcos supporters had tried to get on the base, but were kept outside. Tonight, Marcos, his wife Imelda, other family members and associates will be the guests of the U.S. military. This while federal and local officials work out security arrangements. Marcos has a couple of rich friends here who own hillside mansions. It's believed the former president will stay in one of them. Whether Marcos should be permitted to stay here is the subject of a good deal of controversy. There are deep divisions among Hawaii's politicians and among members of this state's Filipino community. About 80 Filipinos demonstrated against Marcos yesterday, urging that he not be welcomed here. Today, a committee of the state legislature was debating a resolution urging that sanctuary for Marcos be denied. And the mayor of Honolulu says he does not want to use city funds to pay for Marcos' security.
He can use part of the several hundred millions of dollars that he's got stashed away in our country to buy his own protection.
The Secret Service has sent a special detail here to protect Marcos, part of the price of getting him out of the Philippines. George Lewis, NBC News, Honolulu.
And this is Nightline. Beginning today, things are changing in the Philippines. Just hours ago, the first release of political prisoners since President Aquino took office. We'll hear from a man who spent a quarter of his life in detention. And I'll be talking with President Aquino's chief of staff and her newly appointed prime minister.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Manila, Ted Koppel.
Now, all the campaign promises, all the pledges of reform resonate with new meaning. Corazon Aquino takes her place with Margaret Thatcher, Indira Gandhi, and Golda Meir as one of the very few women ever to be democratically elected chief of state. Now she has the power to go with the visions of a free country that marked her campaign against Ferdinand Marcos. The first symbolic gesture has already been made. Here's Nightline correspondent James Walker.
May I request Mr. Jaime Verdan, one of the released detainees, to say a few words. Jaime.
This is the new Philippines, a place where the Army Chief of Staff is proudly announcing the release of political prisoners, 33 of them today. Jaime Verdan spent the last 2 years in jail for allegedly taking part in a bombing, but he was never charged, never brought to trial. He's one of more than 600 political prisoners now hoping to be released.
My baby has been born and has been raised in prison.
Judy Takawalo has been a prisoner for 4 years.
I was active with the student movement before martial law was imposed as a student leader.
Jaime Serrano was a member of the National Sugar Workers Union. He's also spent 4 years in prison, awaiting trial on a charge of rebellion.
We are banking on Cory's promise that she'll release all political prisoners, no matter the category.
Other events in the new Philippines today, a special mass thanking the Army for overthrowing the Marcos government.
Never, my brothers and sisters, never have I been prouder to be a Filipino. Mabuhay ang Filipino.
Filipino entrepreneurs are cashing in on the new regime with a new souvenir, pieces of barbed wire that used to surround the presidential palace at Malacañang. The palace itself has become Manila's #1 tourist spot.
We only see this in the pictures, but now this is now a reality. We are here. We are very happy. We are so happy.
Thousands continue to gather on the grounds of the palace, which have been partly restricted as government troops search for landmines and booby traps left behind. Officers say they've already found a number of remote-controlled anti-personnel mines among the trees and bushes where crowds had been gathering. But most Filipinos have not been allowed to visit this part of the palace. It's been the family residence for the past 20 years of President and Mrs. Marcos. The Marcoses lived on the second floor, and a quick look inside reveals possible evidence of a sudden departure. In the middle of a large banquet table, uneaten portions of eggs, toast, and caviar. The beds are unmade, and the closets still full of dresses and racks of shoes. Also left behind, portraits of the former First Lady and of a younger President Marcos in an heroic pose. Today, an older, ailing Mr. Marcos began his exile in Hawaii. Now, there are new heroes in the Philippines, like former political prisoner Jaime Verdun, who will be going home later today. This is James Walker for Nightline in Manila.
The political prisoners are just the tip of the iceberg. When we come back, President Aquino's chief of staff charges that there are thousands of Filipinos who can never be released. They have simply disappeared and are believed to have been murdered.
This 7th Party Congress, plus Ted Koppel in Manila on Aquino's rise to power. Tomorrow on ABC's World News Tonight.
Referred to as the Little President. It has nothing to do with stature. The nickname is a reflection of the post's power. President Aquino yesterday named a civil rights lawyer to that job. He is a man who himself was imprisoned for 2 months under Marcos for participating in a public demonstration. His name, Joker Arroyo.
When the history of the Philippines is known, perhaps we would beat the record of Argentina in magnitude and the kind of torture this country has suffered during the Marcos government.
You're talking about, when you compare it to Argentina, you're talking about thousands of disappeared.
That's correct.
In the Philippines also?
Yes.
Thousands.
Thousands. Nameless, faceless. They haven't surfaced. But I'm sure that the families of these victims have them listed down. And we're sure that in this government, many will surface. Just when we don't know. But we expect that.
You're raising what could be a huge problem for this government. Because when you compare it to Argentina, you obviously better than I know what happened in Argentina. When you start looking into who was responsible, you suddenly find that the people who are responsible are sitting on your right, sitting on your left. They are now your colleagues in government.
The parallelism is apt. How far this problem can be solved, I don't know. It's fearsome. Precisely because you said they're not sitting next to us. We're not going to forget the past simply because we have to step on the toes of some of the higher-ups, no?
Even though those higher-ups brought you into power.
Oh, yes, yes, yes. It's a strong yes. We have to do it.
You're in for some tough times.
No, sir. No, Ted, we won't. We won't. We survived it the past few days. We're going to survive the test again.
The question of Benigno Aquino's assassination. Marcos is gone. Nothing further is going to be pressed against him. But a lot of questions remain in your mind, I know.
Oh, yes. Yes. Not only in my mind, but in the people's mind.
Well, are the people going to have to put that on the shelf and forget about it?
Perhaps there could be a board of inquiry. Reopen the case. Perhaps it's easier to get witnesses now.
People will feel freer to talk.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
But let's assume now that you have a board of inquiry and that people feel a lot freer to talk. And fingers start pointing, because we come back again now to where we begin. They start pointing in the direction of some of the military men who are still in power. What are you going to do?
Let the chips fall. Why, they should be. It's what we fought for. Civilian supremacy. That the military should not again, ever, control this country. We will survive.
We also raised with Mr. Arroyo Washington's central strategic concern in the Philippines. Those two largest military bases outside the United States. The Naval Air Station at Subic Bay and Clark Air Force Base. President Aquino has said she will honor agreements which keep those bases in U.S. hands until 1991. But she offers no assurances beyond that date. The bases are the second largest employer in this country, offering jobs to 40,000 Filipinos. For the United States, they are crucially important. But their strategic value to the Philippines, as Arroyo made clear, is almost non-existent.
It's only 4 hours to Korea and Japan. 4 air hours. 4 air hours. and 5 sea days to Korea and Japan. 4 hours, air hours to Singapore, 8 hours to Diego Garcia. That's how much the United States needs those bases. There's no other place where you can transfer them contrary to whatever is being said in the United States.
What's going to happen with those bases?
As Ms. Aquino said, she'll respect it till 1991. But she'll keep her options open. So along those lines, talks will be reopened in 1991. So what happens in 1991, we don't know.
Well, what I guess I'm interested in is, to President Marcos, the equation seemed to be quite clear. While no money was actually paid for the bases, nevertheless, President Marcos regarded the foreign aid that was given as, in effect, being rented.
Oh, yes. What crimes were committed in the name of those bases, you know? United States aid given to the Philippines, military aid. And those military aid were used to buy U.S. weapons. Those U.S. weapons were used to kill our people. That is, in brief, is what U.S. aid was all about. Not to fight an external enemy, but fight the insurgency.
Oh, the insurgency.
Yes.
All right.
And U.S. weapons, U.S. money. And the United States government supported Mr. Marcos because Mr. Marcos said, in short, as long as you want the basis, you can have it. On a quid pro quo, just support me. So the United States continued supporting Marcos until the situation became so intolerable that he became a liability to the United States.
When we come back, I'll be talking with the new Vice President, Prime Minister, and Foreign Minister of the Philippines. One man holds all 3 jobs. His name, Salvador Laurel.
Who is now the man I promised you a moment ago, the Vice President, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister of the new government here in the Philippines, Salvador Laurel. Which of the many titles are you going to go with?
Well, to you, Ted, just call me Toy.
You're very kind, but I think Mr. Vice President would be more appropriate under the circumstances. I want to get right to the subjects at hand. You've already begun, your administration has already begun releasing political prisoners.
Yes, yes.
Won't they all be released?
Eventually. It's just that not all can be released at the same time. Some of them we can't find. Where, some of them have been kept in secret detention centers.
By whom?
By the outgoing regime. And,
but who was actually doing it? The police?
Well, this was under the personal supervision of the loyalists of Marcos, people under General Ver.
Now, you're raising a delicate question there, because while General Ver has gone, while President Marcos has gone, some of those loyalists
are still here.
Yes. Some of those loyalists are still in positions within the military of considerable power.
Yes, that's true.
Some of those loyalists, in fact, at the last minute, decided to come over and join you.
Yes.
How do you resolve this moral problem? It's also a practical problem.
It is correct. It is both a moral and a practical problem. But we solve this by meeting it on a case-to-case basis. As loyalists come to us, we look at him straight in the eye and determine whether he's sincere. And we believe in the human character that a man can always change for the better. And a man can repent or try to do better, change for the better. So we look at it that way.
You are showing enormous compassion for them. Mrs. Aquino is showing unbelievable compassion since her husband was assassinated. But you know there are going to be tens of thousands of family members of thousands of people who have simply disappeared over the last few years, who may not be quite as compassionate as you, who may not understand that you have within your own administration some of these men.
Initially, there will be some resistance. I suppose it could be compared to the days of the Civil War in the United States, when the Confederates and the Unionists were really, they couldn't really agree with each other. But time will correct that, and time heals all wounds, they say. I believe that in time they will see the wisdom of a policy of unification and reconciliation, because the objective is to stabilize the nation politically first, before we can effect any economic recovery.
You mean none of these people, even if it turns out that they were torturers or murderers, will be put on trial?
No, I didn't say that. As a matter of fact, we have just created yesterday a commission, a presidential commission on human rights and good government. And this is now being headed by former Senator Jovito Salonga, one of our best legal minds and unquestionably a man of integrity, highly respected in the country. And he's looking into that, what cases ought to be prosecuted.
So it is possible,
yes,
that some of the men who are in high positions in the military today, perhaps even some of the men who helped you come to power, may yet face prosecution.
Yes, depending on the findings of the Special Presidential Commission.
And that commission will be holding hearings?
Yes, and inquiries, investigations. And there are cases probably where cases will have to be filed.
Let me talk about the most famous case of all, the murder of Benigno Aquino.
Yes.
The original commission of inquiry found that there were a number of high-ranking military officers, men who were
26,
that they bore a responsibility for that assassination, but nothing happened.
Yes. Now, the people believe the verdict of the first commission, the Agrava board, and they do not believe the findings of the Sandigan, the second board. Now, basically, this is a matter which President Aquino will have to decide, because she is principally the aggrieved party here. The person killed was her husband. Now, she has made public statements to the fact that she has no hatred, no vengeance in her heart, and that she is adopting a policy of reconciliation and magnanimity. She said, in defeat, defiance, but in victory, magnanimity.
That almost defies comprehension. You mean if it were determined, you knew, and she knew, that you had found the men who ordered the killing of her husband, nothing would be done?
Well, as far as Mrs. Aquino, the president, is concerned, she has already said that her number one suspect is President Marcos.
And he's gone, and she's not going to try and bring him back.
So if he's not around, and I don't think he's going to hound her, she's going to hound him around the world. I think her attitude is one of Christian forgiveness.
On that note, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with Vice President Laurel in just a moment. The Vice President, Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Salvador Laurel. You have been talking, I understand, over these past few hours about the reconstruction of the military command. Are you going to keep in power some of the people who were the top commanders of the Marcos military forces?
We will have a special commission.
Another commission?
Yes, because, well, it may not be a very a big one or a very with a lot of fanfare. It will be a very quiet commission to find out who of the, because we are trying to rid or purge the military of unfits or misfits. There have been a lot of abuses committed by the military, and yet there are a lot of good apples still. And we'd like to separate the rotten from the good apple.
Are you going to do it from the top down or the bottom up?
I think we'll have to do it simultaneously. It's a big order, but it has to be done. And I believe that General Fidel Ramos is in a position to do that.
Let me talk to you for a moment in your capacity as foreign minister. One of the most delicate issues is going to be those U.S. military bases. I know until 1991 everything is fine. What do your instincts tell you is going to happen 5 years from now?
I think, unless the world situation changes, that the United States government will ask for an extension of the lease or the term of those bases. Under the present agreement, they are supposed to notify the Philippine government 1 year before 1991. That means in 1990, if they want to have it extended, they should notify the Philippine government.
And what will your reaction be?
As foreign minister, if I'm still foreign minister at that point, I would create a panel to discuss with the American counterpart the kind of agreement they have in mind. And my proposal is that any agreement reached between the two panels must be submitted to the Filipino people in a plebiscite. My objective is that if the agreement is good and acceptable to the Filipino people will ratify that agreement. And once ratified, it will be conducive to a more stable relationship between the two countries if an agreement of that nature is ratified by the people. Nobody can turn around anymore and say, we don't want that agreement, or the people don't want it.
You have been most generous with your time. I thank you very much indeed for letting us come to your home. And I wish you the very, very best and good luck.
Thank you.
What is going on here in the Philippines in these first hectic hours of the Aquino administration is a government that got underway by jumpstart. There was no time for preparation. There have been no careful studies conducted in think tanks and then passed on to the technicians who ultimately make governments work. Overnight, literally overnight, one leadership left town and a collection of opposition leaders, themselves led by a self-described housewife, have been thrust into the middle of a whirlwind. For good or ill, Corazon Aquino has been handed a destiny she could never even have imagined only 2 or 3 short years ago. Tomorrow, we'll be coming to you again from the Philippines with what we hope will be an extraordinary broadcast. ABC News will have more on that during the day tomorrow. Tomorrow also, as he has done all this week, Peter Jennings will be reporting from Moscow on the 27th Soviet Party Congress, where things are.
Washington, a congressman from New York City is now spearheading a legislative move to strip the Marcos family of millions of dollars in assets.
The value of these properties, which are owned by the Marcoses in the New York area alone, is worth about $350 million, which comes to 2 to 3 times as much as the annual level of American economic assistance to the Philippines. We as a nation have a significant interest in helping the new government of the Philippines deal with the underlying economic...
I spoke with her earlier this morning from Manila. It was her first American television interview since becoming president. In just a few minutes, we'll hear what she has to say about her country's relations with the United States, about reforming the Philippines government, about picking up the pieces of the shattered economy in the Philippines, about dealing with the communist rebels there, and also about Ferdinand Marcos, the man she is accused of murdering her husband.
And we are going to make